Hello, my name is Israel Martinez. Welcome back to my podcast, Fo-Sci Rant. I'll be talking about Learning Module 3 titled Doing Science. But more specifically, I want to really talk about Locards exchange principle, um, and how we went over it in this module, and how it's seen in um, not just a famous crime that has happened, but also a more current crime, more current event. So in this module, we learned about forensic evidence, like the types of evidence in a crime scene, um, like the types of yeah, like the types of evidence we saw in a crime scene, and even the we even did experiments that showed us how these types of evidence occur and how some are connected. So some of the types of physical evidence specifically that can be seen in a crime scene are biological evidence, impression evidence, and like I mentioned earlier, Locards exchange principle, right? So to give you all a brief definition for these types of evidence, biological evidence can be, let's say, any type of material that contains human biological characteristics. Biological being like the main word. So like blood, saliva, hair, so like DNA, stuff that make up uh, a human's biological characteristic. Yeah, basically. So, impression evidence is any markings left behind when one object comes into contact with another. The important word here would be markings, because examples of this would be footprints, tool marks, and fingerprints. So basically, like any markings left behind by an object, a person, etc. Now, Locards exchange principle, my main focus of this podcast, is a principle in the forensic world that states that anytime two objects come into contact, there is an exchange of information. So, for example, a glass in a breaking and entry, right? So the the principle would state that the two objects that came into contact would be the criminal and the glass, right? The criminal came in contact with the glass, causing it to break, right? And therefore, um, maybe even traces of the criminal were left behind on the glass, and glass, little glass pieces were found on the criminal, which can like essentially solve a crime, right? These transfer materials, like the glass being transferred, the fibers in the criminal's clothes transferred, can be known as trace evidence. So, um, yeah, so and these trace evidence we can be used to trace back to a criminal, a suspect, or even a victim, right? Because and so these types of evidence and definitions were put into practice when we did a concept map for physical evidence. I'll put up a concept map for you guys so you can see what I'm talking about. Um, but for the concept map, I got to see not just the types of physical evidence, but also the components that made up these evidence and even how they related to each other. So, like I said, like earlier when I was explaining Locards exchange principle, I also mentioned trying trace evidence. So, trace evidence in this concept map could be connected to Locards exchange principle, but you could also use trace evidence to go back to let's say biological evidence because you can use someone's DNA to trace them back to a person or someone's fingerprints. And like I mentioned earlier, fingerprints are also an example of impression evidence. So you know so that they're all connected, and we got to see that when we did our concept map. So yeah, that assignment helped me define types of evidence and see what objects can be defined as a specific type of evidence. Now, there was another assignment that we did that I want to talk about because it helped me visualize Locards exchange principle a little bit better, and it actually introduced me to Locards exchange principle, and it just made it also interesting, right? So, in this assignment 5, we had to wear a t-shirt all day, and we had to take a record of the locations we visited throughout the day and the time we were there. And at the end of the day, we had to examine the t-shirt. So once we were done visiting all these places and we were going home, we put the t-shirt in a Ziploc bag, um, so it won't get contaminated with other, um, like fibers, threads, hairs, like etc. So we put it in the Ziploc bag. We got home, we cleaned the surface, make sure there was nothing that could contaminate it. And me specifically, I put some trash bags down and put the shirt on top. I got my lamp, my light, and shined it over the shirt so I can see the little threads and fibers, right? So, sorry, I lost my. Oh yeah, so the purpose of examining the shirt was to see the traces of fabrics and other materials that we picked up from the places we left, using different types of collecting materials. So that was the point of this um, uh, assignment. It wasn't just to explain Locards and see and visualize Locards exchange principle, but it was also to see the um, to put into practice the types of collecting materials we use. But more specifically, what resonated with me was Locards exchange principle, right? So yeah, so it helped me visualize um, the little different types of materials my shirt picked up during the day. And it amazed me because I would have never guessed about the amount of information that is passed um, between two objects when they come in contact, which helped me visualize again how much evidence we leave behind, and I quote evidence, right? Because like when I was doing this, I was in the hospital, and so when I had put on like the gown on, the shirt I had on had picked up the little fabrics from the gown, so there was a bunch of like yellow fibers in my shirt, and so that's kind of what my assignment had. I had a bunch of white fibers. I had red fibers because the gown also had like red like lines on it. I also had a bunch of cotton from the bed. I even had some black pieces of fabric, which I'm guessing was from the nurses when they were touching me, um, and like taking my vitals and stuff like that, right? So so overall, this activity was a great example of Locar's exchange principle because of the materials that was found in my shirt that I gathered throughout the day from the objects or people that I came in contact with. So now to make this a little more relevant and interesting um, to today, the O.J. Simpson case. I'm talking about the O.J. Simpson case and how Lockhart's principle came into solving this case, right? So O.J. Simpson's case was solved by utilizing or using Lockhart's exchange principle. For instance, in this criminal case, Lockhart's principle was applied through the analysis of DNA evidence, right? Meaning blood samples were found at the crime scene and matched DNA evidence, and it matched the DNA evidence found in O.J. Simpson's cars, as well as the infamous glove. I'm pretty sure we all seen throughout social media. That was found in his home, right? So now on a more current event, talk about a more current event that um, we saw local registration principle would be this case that involved a British cab driver, David Butler, who was wrongfully accused of murder after his DNA was found under the victim's fingernails. So he had explained that secondary DNA transfer occurred when the real killer might have ridden in his cab and picked up traces of DNA. So eventually, he was released after 8 months in jail, and he was pretty mad over the whole thing. Obviously, who wouldn't, right? But but basically, this showed us how um, he had explained, sorry, how when he was pleading his case, he had said that no, like it can't be me. He was denying it because obviously he didn't do it, but because he was a cab driver, the pieces of him, of his evidence, of his DNA, were transferred on to the actual killer, and the kill and was when the killer and the victim were coming into contact, the victim has scratched the killer, and essentially the pieces of DNA that were left from that the criminal took from David Butler, the cab driver, when he gave him a ride to the house, it got transferred over to the victim. So when um, the forensic crime people got into the evidence, took note of this, right? And they caught his DNA under the fingernails, but it was actually it actually wasn't him, it was the killer. Which again, this shows us Locards exchange principle in action, but it also shows us how dangerous it can be in the sense that one might get falsely put in jail, right? So this was it was an interesting. Um, After doing my research, I found this article and it talked about this case about David Butler, and I just felt like sharing because it really it shows us how it showed us not just Locards exchange principle in action, but again, it showed us how scary it could be or dangerous it could be for anybody because you never know that the people you come in contact with could essentially be a killer or the type of trouble they might get in and how you might be falsely accused for their actions, right? So that was today's episode. Um, I hope you guys enjoyed. It was I hope it wasn't too quick. Um, Again, I talked about just a little bit of summarize. I talked about mostly low cards exchange principle, but I also talked about learning module three, doing science, right? I talked about types of evidence, how the assignments we did that allowed us to use to put into practice um, low cards exchange principle, and we also got to define the different types of physical evidence, and we got to visualize through a concept map these physical evidence and how they correlate to each other. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you.